Let's talk about another tricky balance. This difference between quantity versus quality.
Both.
Yes.
I want lots of good things.
Yes, and. Right, so, I mean, the reality is that, like, resources are finite.
Yeah.
Time, energy, money, you only have so much. And I think all of us as individuals feel more comfortable engaging in a certain level of quantity and quality based upon our capabilities, based upon our overarching goals. Like, how, do we just want to get a lot done and move the needle and make forward progress versus do we want to do one thing and do it really well and make this perfect? I see that being a big division a lot of times in dyadic conversations or in team conversations.
Dyadic being one-on-one, right?
One-on-one,
Yeah.
yes.
So professorial.
Yes.
Yes. Do you think that is like a trait, or do you think that is a culture, or what do you think that is? Is that a choice? Is that a gut reaction? Like, what do you think that is?
So here's another more professorial answer. I think that what we can do a lot of times is evaluate what are in the assessments, right? We're evaluating a trait, we're evaluating a value, we're evaluating a specific cognitive orientation. And you can evaluate those individually, and that's helpful because each one of those individual dimensions within each one of these traits leads to a certain type of behavior. But you also can take a step back and create what would be called a profile analysis that is a weighted assortion of all sorts of different characteristics and dimensions that leads to a certain type of perspective or orientation, such as your preference for quantity over quality or something like that. So I think that, and this is, I think, an important part of what Cloverleaf is doing, is that we're not just looking at one dimension or one assessment at a time. We're looking at them all on the aggregate because we have so many within the platform. We can then pick apart all of these and then put them back together in ways that are meaningful in different ways. And so for me, this is actually more, it's something else. It's not a specific trait, it's not a specific value, it's not a specific preference. It is something that is at a more abstract level. It's a gestalt of all of these other things, and it kind of comes across as, here's our preference. I want to engage in this, that, or the other. And so I think we're doing that regularly, and we're kind of figuring out what people's preferences are. And so, like, for me, it's I'm kind of in the middle, and I feel like I have a hard time because I can't decide which way to go a lot of times because
you're stuck.
I'm stuck in the middle. Please, somebody just tell me. I need Darren to come in and just tell me. This is what you're going to do.
He would say quantity.
Quantity.
He will always say quantity.
Okay, then does that mean that you're more quality?
Yeah, so we actually, Darren and I have talked about our yin and yang of quality, which is me, versus speed, which is him.
There you go.
And so that can come off as quantity.
Yeah,
like, test so many things. The more conversations, the more opportunities, the better. You can try them all out. Whereas I'm sitting here like, Darren, one integration at a time. Like, you can't actually build an awesome thing 17 times all at once, right? And then lo and behold, people don't use it if you don't actually do a good job with it, like do a high quality job with it. But that can also lead to us not doing anything or only doing one thing when we needed to do tests on 4 things to see which one initially sticks and is the one to go deep on, right? So he always talks about it like our yin and our yang. And I would say, though, I am naturally more in the middle and can feel stuck. Like, if I have a day with nothing on the agenda, I'm like, gosh, do I bust out 17 tasks or one thing that'll take a longer time? And I think the situation I'm in pushes me to one or the other. So, for example, Darren, because he is so quantity speed, my quality side, like, red flags go up, right? And so that's the one that really leans in here at work.
Right. I don't want to overgeneralize, but I do think that the higher up you go, a lot of times we are more thinking about at scale, on aggregate, right? I want to make sure that my quality level is up to a specific point, and that's enough. And then beyond that, it really needs to be about quantity, because without that quantity, I can't get the underlying engine to produce whatever it is that we need to produce.
Absolutely.
And so the challenge then becomes being really clear on what that line of quality is so that everyone understands for this specific task, this is what we're shooting for. For this task, this is what we're shooting for, so that everyone's on the same page for what it can be.
Yeah.
Which is really fuzzy, right? What is quality, though? I mean, like, how do you really dictate what is the highest of quality?
I think what's so good about knowing this about yourself, though, like knowing which side you veer to and what's super important to you, is really eye-opening in conversations. It helps you decode some of that stuff that's frustrating. So, for example, on our leadership team, I said I'm quality, but really our CTO is quality. Like, he's all the way there, right?
Yeah.
His name's Matt, and he's the bomb. And then Darren is all quantity, right? And so they're on different sides of the spectrum, and I find myself right in between them, and often trying to like be the go-between messenger. Like, I'll have a one-on-one with Darren, I'll have a one-on-one with Matt, and I finally was like, y'all need to have one-on-ones, because like I'm just in between, right?
Don't shoot the messenger. I'm just trying to help.
Right. And we had this leadership team conversation, which I think there's like 6 people on leadership team. And I was like, y'all, we have some broken records here. Like, I hear it every time where Matt says, we need to invest in this. If we want to do it, we got to do it right. And we've got to allocate the right amount of investment.
Right.
And then Darren says, but we just got to try things. We just got to test it out.
Iterate.
We're a startup. Yeah. We can't do everything perfectly. And then Matt says, I'm not trying to do perfect. I'm trying to do right. We've got to invest. And Darren says, but we just got to test and keep trying and keep going. Like, we're young, we're a startup, we don't have the capital, right? And I was like, they're easy to pick on because they're so different on this spectrum.
Yeah.
But they weren't realizing, like, oh, this is different preference. And we're actually not even talking about the meat of the conversation because we're so stuck in our perspective and the glasses we have on of which side of the spectrum we fall on.
Right. Yeah. They're coming at the conversation with that lens, not necessarily coming at it from each other's lens to try to get to the source of the problem. And you can flex on your strengths during that conversation when you're looking at both, but not necessarily sticking to your perspective for the sake of winning or something like that. Not that Matt and Darren do. I mean, they always figure it out, right? And I think it's healthy to have that debate. And this gets back to, I think, almost like an overarching theme here, right? It's like, know where you are, know where the other party is, and be open-minded enough to ensure that you're genuinely and authentically incorporating the other's perspective. And it's not about winning, it's about making sure that you do what's best for that team at that particular moment for that task.
And I think a lot of times people feel unheard or misunderstood, and that's why they can continue saying, no, but we still need to invest the right amount, or we still need to like keep testing and growing fast and trying new things, right? And it's because you think the other person didn't hear you because you're so in your zone of what your way of viewing the world is. And when you can pause, recognize that, step back and say, okay, this is just because my perspective is this and Matt's perspective is this, and so therefore, like, when we're actually talking about the topic of this product build or whatever it is, like, if we put those perspectives to the side, let's talk more nuts and bolts, right? And what I like about this example, too, for everyone listening who's a normal, real human being, this is hard. We live in this world, and we still struggle with it here at Cloverleaf, where I'm full of great examples of how all these differences bring up conflict and tension and miscommunication and stalled decision-making or lead to awesome decision-making, and we recognize it in each other, and we appreciate that difference, and so we know who the sounding board should be, and we know when we need an additional perspective, and then we invent something way more powerful, way more exciting. Our metrics are up and to the right, and everyone goes home really proud of what we're doing, and we're great, we did it together, kumbaya, you know? Yeah.
It's brilliant. You're right, for sure.
Thanks.
That actually reminds me of a really good exercise that gets at what you're talking about. So I had, this happens a lot, there's sales and operations.
Oh gosh.
And they fight because operations want to reduce cost and sales wants to bring in revenue. And it's easier to bring in revenue when things are cheaper. And it just is a really hard balance sometimes. And so there was these two, they were essentially the managers of these two different departments, and I was kind of a third party that had related tasks with both parties. And trying to come up with ways to help them like actually work through it and work it out. I ran across this exercise And it's used a lot in what are called like mindful leadership programs.
Okay.
And so you're helping people relate to each other in a way that's more present and empathetic and engage in perspective taking and infuse a little emotional intelligence. And the exercise goes like this, and it's a lot of fun. Like everyone should do this with their colleagues, with their manager, or people that they just disagree with.
Okay.
So
maybe your spouse.
Maybe your spouse. Definitely.
Y'all should do this with your spouse.
Literally daily with your spouse. So you find some topic, and it doesn't matter what it is, really.
Yeah.
And you ask person A
yeah.
to talk about it for 1 minute straight, and person B is not allowed to talk for the entire minute. They can acknowledge, they can do the head nods, they can do some nonverbals, but they cannot talk. At the end of that 1 minute, person B has to paraphrase everything that they've heard person A say. Mm-hmm. And then they can have a dyadic conversation, back and forth conversation of, yes, that's correct, or no, I actually meant this, or whatever. Mm-hmm. And then they switch roles. And person B gets to do it, while person A does nothing but listen. And through that exercise, you accomplish multiple things. Number one, I feel heard.
Yes.
They genuinely were listening to me. Mm-hmm. And I felt I was given the space to have everything I wanted to have said out there in the open and have it acknowledged. And then the person reiterated back to me what they thought I was saying. Mm-hmm. And so, after you can train yourself to have these types of conversations where you're really engaging in active listening, and then the next step can happen, which is now that you've internalized all of the things that are said by both parties, then you can have the real conversation that needs to happen. Mm-hmm. But most of the time, we don't get to that real conversation. We just keep having, back and forth.
The irony of that is, like, when you feel like the end of the meeting is coming and you've just got to make sure your point is made, you don't feel like you have time to say, okay, so what I heard you say is, is that correct? Mm-hmm. Great. Well, then here's what I have, like my additional point to that, right? Yeah. You don't feel like you have time for that, but instead you end up wasting the time because you're like, well, my perspective is this, and then the other person repeats their perspective, and you're like, I know, you just said that. Yeah. Like, I got it.
It's repeat. And then the decision on what actually happens ends up being a matter of, like, who gets there first or who has the next conversation with the real decision maker. And then, nothing really ended up being reconciled. It just momentum decided for you who is actually going to be...
And then you're just frustrated. Everyone's frustrated.
Right. That's not how... Yeah. Ideally, you at least get acknowledgement from both parties.
Active listening is just a good life skill in any of the differences we've talked about.